One of the things that I really enjoy about Batman the Animated Series is the way that the creators shone the spotlight on some of the more obscure villains. And one of those villains is the subject of today's video, the Mad Hatter. BTAS's version of the Mad Hatter initially starts out as quite a sympathetic figure. He's just a lonely guy that wants to get a date, and many of us will know the feeling of unrequited love and may even recognise some of the sentiments that Jervis Tetch expresses in this episode. However, he soon crosses a line when he starts using his mind control technology to force his will on the people around him. I'd been curious how much of this characterization existed in the original comic books, because I also remember seeing the Mad Hatter in the 1960s Batman TV show, and he was a very distinctive looking gentleman with a hat fetish, and most notably, a knockout ray that popped out of his hat. The Mad Hatter first appeared in 1948's Batman number 49. Initially, he was a small man that looked like he had stepped out of the world of Alice in Wonderland, and had a hideout in an old theatre that had last put on a production of Through the Looking Glass. This Mad Hatter is no serious threat, thanks to his diminutive stature, and he's not seen again for almost a decade. In 1956, the Mad Hatter resurfaced in Detective Comics 230, looking completely different. He's now tall with bright red hair and a really distinctive moustache. Any reference to Alice in Wonderland is gone. Instead, he has an extreme hat fetish, and his only goal is to collect the one missing item in his collection, Batman's cowl. As someone that hoards BTAS memorabilia, I feel a little bit seen. It's this version of the Mad Hatter that was featured in the Batman show from the 1960s, complete with the fiery hair and fierce eyebrows. However, he was scarcely used in the comics, perhaps because his hat gimmick was a bit limiting. In January of 1982, Detective Comics 510, the discrepancy between these two versions of the Mad Hatter was retconned by writer Doug Mensch, revealing the fact that they were two separate people. Isn't it kind of weird Batman never noticed? And that the Mad Hatter had disposed of this imposter, although he turned up again a few years later in Detective Comics 573 and was later given his own identity of the Hat Man, and oh god, stop! I think this change was made to further distance the Batman comics from the 1966 TV show and return to the original comic book roots, but it just added to the convoluted mess of continuity that so many people find off-putting about comic books. Having said that, it's not like this new Mad Hatter was all dark and gritty. He was accompanied by a pet chimpanzee called Carol Lewis. And while he did have a large collection of hats, his main weapon was a mind-copying machine that had the potential to wipe people's minds. And keep the design of this machine in mind, because I'll be coming back to it later. The Mad Hatter's mind-controlling hats were also introduced shortly afterwards as a means for the then catatonic Scarecrow to be involved in the 500th appearance of Batman in Detective Comics 526. It kind of blows my mind that arguably the biggest thing about the Mad Hatter, his mind control hats, was just casually dropped in to explain the appearance of a then disposed of villain. By 1992, when Batman the Animated Series aired, the Mad Hatter had only made a handful of appearances in the comics. But even then, his backstory was all over the place. The BTAS creative team, as ever, mined his entire backstory and stripped away all of the convoluted content and aimed to give him more believable motivations. So, in BTAS, there is only one Mad Hatter, Jervis Tetch. There is no pet chimpanzee sidekick, no hat fetish. Instead, Jervis is a talented scientist working for Wayne Enterprises, experimenting with mind control technology. He initially uses this to issue commands to lab rats, but eventually he starts using the tech on people to impress his co-worker Alice, with the hopes that it will make her love him. This character of Alice resembles the traditional depiction of the protagonist of Through the Looking Glass. She's clearly young, has a sickly sweet voice, and comes across as being very innocent. This adds a further dark element to Jervis's obsession with her. Frankly, it's really creepy and grosses me out. Initially, Jervis is quite a sympathetic character. He's lonely and he pines for Alice, perhaps because she's the only woman that has ever shown him any kindness. He's not motivated by greed, but by lust and envy. When we meet him, he's meek with a domineering boss, and he admires Alice from afar. But when he's presented with the means to have the kind of life he has always wanted to have, he takes that opportunity with both hands and runs with it. Jervis spends a lot of time talking to himself and his lab rats. Yes, this serves as exposition, but it also tells us a lot about his character. He doesn't have anyone or anything in his life outside of his work, aside from his fondness for Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, as seen by the large poster he has framed in his lab. While his schemes start out harmless enough, he uses the mind control device to get the best table at a restaurant and be treated like a celebrity to impress Alice. When he and Alice are accosted by two muggers in the park, we get a very clear look at Jervis's dark side. He casually commands the two men to commit suicide by jumping off the nearest bridge and into the river, and they would have done it too if not for Batman. When Alice spurns his affections and accepts the marriage proposal of another, Jervis lashes out, using the mind control tech to end Alice's relationship. When that doesn't work, he places Alice under his control, dragging her off to a Wonderland-themed amusement park where he can continue to live out his fantasy life. He is literally trying to force her to love him, and it's clear that Jervis is aware that turning Alice into a love doll isn't the same thing as genuine affection, but he doesn't care. He only cares about his own selfish gratification, and in the process throws his entire life away.
Batman forced me to do it. He was going to take her away from me. I had no choice.
You could have respected her wishes and left her alone.
I'd have killed her first.
The Mad Hatter makes a few more appearances in BTAS, perhaps most famously as the villain in the episode Perchance to Dream, the favourite episode of Batman voice actor Kevin Conroy. R.I.P. I'm never going to stop saying that. The design of Tetch's device in this episode strongly resembles the mind-wiping machine from the comic books, but rather than stealing the person's knowledge, this machine traps the wearer in the world of their dreams. As an aside, this episode's title, Perchance to Dream, is a reference to Shakespeare's famous To Be or Not to Be soliloquy from Hamlet, in which Hamlet contemplates suicide, which nicely foreshadows the way to escape from the dream machine. It's funny to note that both of BTAS's suicide references can be found in these Mad Hatter episodes. I have no idea why that's significant, but I thought it was worth pointing out. So, in summation, once again the writers on BTAS took a goofy, niche character from the comic books and transformed him into a believable, flawed human being, with some fantastical elements. This is a kid's adventure show after all. In this day and age, with the rise of incels lashing out at society, this Mad Hatter seems oddly prophetic.